Hi, I'm Earl Press, and I'm sitting here with, dare I say it, a living legend. Here he is, the most effectual Arnold Stang.
Hi, nice to be here again.
So let's start at the beginning. First, you were a baby. Oh, no, wait, let's not go back that far.
Oh, I never was a baby.
Oh, well, then we definitely won't go back that far. But let's start with the beginning of Top Cat. How did you get cast in the role of Top Cat?
Well, there was a lot of talk about doing this show, and so they decided they wanted to do that, and they looked all over, and the character that TC, the character that I ended up playing, was completely unlike what I had been identified with, because usually, I was identified with an entirely different kind of personality. But somebody suggested that I come in and talk to them about it, and so I went in and I met with Joe Barbera and Alan Dinehart and some of the other people, and they said, well, let's play around with it a little, and we played around with it, and they finally decided that's what they wanted, whatever it was, no matter how wrong it might be. that was what we were going to blunder with, and so we started with that.
So when you were developing the character, did they say anything to you about?
No, they didn't, as a matter of fact. And as a matter of fact, the one thing that Alan seemed to do more than anything else, and Joe suggested it a couple of times, but Joe didn't really say it that much, was, to try to be more Arnold Stang. And I kept saying, well, you sure that's what TC is supposed to be? Yes, that's what we want. So I ended up doing myself again, which has been very effective for me other times.
Yeah.
I may have surgery done to look that way permanently.
Let's talk a little bit about the other cast members of Top Cat. What do you remember about Maurice Gosfield, who played Benny the Ball?
Well, I thought Maurice Gosfield was just a fantastic character. He was a hilariously funny character who actually was an extremely worrying kind of guy. He was always worried about something. And I never really thought of him as an actor as much as just a great character. And he was a wonderful personality, and he just sort of blundered his way through the show. And sometimes things went very wrong, and he'd look very apologetic, and then we'd just do it again.
How about Alan Jenkins?
He was very serious. He didn't seem to be an actor at all, but just a very serious kind of brooding man. And apparently he was a very good actor, and he had been in hundreds of different films and things. So he was certainly a big asset to the show. He was Officer Dibble, no question about it.
Yeah.
Right. As a matter of fact, I was sure he was going to arrest us all. It was a good show, and he was very good on it.
How about, tell us what you remember about John Stevenson.
John Stevenson was really like the straight man. He was really kind of like the Cary Grant of the show, even though what he was playing was a character, and in some ways very funny. He was the straight man, really, in some cases. And I thought he was the nicest guy on the show. I liked him very much, and I found him very interesting to talk to and to spend time with. And I really enjoyed working with John Stevenson, although mostly it was his enthusiasm. He was enthusiastic about the show and the people on it, which was great. And so it was a good balance to have somebody like John Stevenson there, and he was very much to be relied on. He was like the anchor. So
yeah, he
I
did a
found that
lot of
very
characters
important.
on the show.
Yeah, he did, and you could always rely on him. He was great.
How about Leo DeLion?
Leo DeLion was a lot of fun to be with. He had a great sense of comedy, and he was very energetic. And I think at one time he must have been a musician or
Yes.
something like that, because he seemed to have a lot of music and rhythm, and he had a lot of bounce to what he did, and he was a lot of fun to be around, and he certainly kept things moving, in the way he did. He had a lot of energy, and everything was up. He was up a lot. When we were working together, he wouldn't hesitate to start singing something or do an imitation of an instrument, And he was a lot of fun to be around, too. I liked him.
How about Marvin Kaplan?
Well, Marvin has been around for a long time, I guess, and he came from New York. I think he came from Brooklyn, as a matter of fact. And he still has a lot of Brooklyn in him. And he's a very worrying kind of guy, and he's kind of always worried about getting things right, and that people weren't doing him wrong, it seems. And he did his work very well. And actually, he had a great sense of comedy, and what he did very well.
Let's talk about the big bosses. What about Bill Hanna?
Yeah, well, Bill Hanna, you know, he wrote the music for those specials that we did, the 2-hour shows. And I guess he always wanted to be a musician too, or he certainly has written music. And I guess he's a very good businessman too, because, I mean, he's got a long track record of doing successful shows. And, you know, he and Joe Barbera were a team at MGM for years before they finally went out on their own, because, you know, for several years they were doing shows that kept winning awards, but nobody ever mentioned Hanna and Barbera. And they had the Flintstones, and I did quite a few other Hanna-Barbera shows, not on a regular basis, but appearances on them.
And what about Joe Barbera?
Right, what about Joe Barbera?
Whatever happened to him? He didn't do much, did he?
I think he opened a candy store.
Yeah.
Immediately.
Yeah.
Well, what I remember about Joe Barbera was that he should have been an actor, because he was, you know, really into all of that kind of stuff, and he wanted to be part of everything, and of course, he was also very successful. And
What do you think the appeal of the Top Cat character is? Why do you think it's lasted all these years?
well, it is the character that has always appealed to people. You know, the Huckleberry Finn, there's a little bit of Huckleberry Finn, there's a little bit of that kind of, and, you know, of course, the idea of somebody who gets away with things. He doesn't really just toe the line, and he outsmarts people. So all of these things are terribly appealing to most people who never get to do those kind of things.
Do you have any final thoughts about Top Cat? Well, maybe not final forever, but final for this interview.
I've spent most of my life doing all of these different kinds of things. I've starred on Broadway, and I've starred in films, and I've starred on television, and all of these kind of things. And I've been nominated for an Academy Award and so on. And yet, when I walk down the street, or when I'm in a strange town with my wife, let's say on a vacation, inevitably it happens. Somebody will get on an elevator that I'm on, and a kid will look up and say, Top Cat. And you think, I've spent all these years doing all these other things, and that's the only identification I have to these people, which was kind of unusual, particularly since I'm not seen on camera in Top Cat. I mean, I'm just the voice is heard. But apparently, there's been a lot of, over the years, there have been a lot of cases of where they show shots from the movie, from the TV, or there'll be an article about me or about the show, and they remember it. And I get a lot of mail. Every week there's a lot of mail that comes in, and they, many times, most of the time, they enclose pictures. And I'm very happy that it's still on, and you know, that people are still writing in and want to see it. And as I said earlier, I get a lot of mail about Top Cat, and I think Top Cat is now what becomes almost a perennial character.
Kind of an icon.
It's become just established to the point of where people just expect to see it, and they make it available to their children, and then the children make it available to their children. I mean, you know, showing this show to their kids or grandchildren.
Well, Arnold, this has been such a thrill and a pleasure, and I just can't thank you enough for coming out and doing this with us, and for all the fans out there. I know that this is just going to be a treat for them.
Oh, well, that'll be nice to know, and I'll look forward to hearing from them. And it was so nice to see you again.
Nice to see you again, too. I hope we can do something again together soon.
Thank you. Yes, I hope so.
Hi, I'm Earl Kress, and to those of you who just watched 15 hours of Top Cat episodes, go ahead and get yourself some eye drops and welcome. And to those of you who cheated and skipped right ahead to this bonus material, this disc will self-destruct in 15 seconds.
Sorry.
Yeah. In the words of TC, nothing. You know, the voice cast certainly had a great deal to do with the success of Top Cat. And in the role of Top Cat, of course, was Arnold Stang. And Benny the Ball was played by Maurice Gosfield. Officer Dibble, or Dribble as Top Cat called him, was played by Alan Jenkins. And Fancy Fancy was John Stevenson. And now we come to the characters of Spook and Brain. Both of them were played by our first guest, Mr. Leo DeLion.
That's me.
And next to Leo, playing the character of Choo Choo, is Mr. Marvin Kaplan.
As a child.
Yay!
Thank you.
And we're also very lucky today to have one of the original writers of Top Cat with us, Mr. Barry Blitzer.
Yay!
Glad to be here. I wish I were an actor.
So guys, did you think you'd be talking about this show and these characters?
Yeah, I thought we'd be talking about it because it was a different kind of cartoon. It was a very intelligent cartoon. Nowadays, you do a cartoon, it's all grunts and people falling off mountains, and you know, it's very violent. Top Cat wasn't. Top Cat was very good humor and adult humor, and we even had an adult slot at night, which is very unusual for a cartoon series.
Right. It was only the second primetime cartoon following the Flintstones.
That's right.
And I read a quote somewhere, and I don't know whether it was either Joe or Bill, who said that it was the most sophisticated cartoon they had ever tried. So John Stevenson had already been working for Hanna-Barbera, and of course Arnold Stang had done cartoon voices for years. But both Leo and Marvin, how did you get into doing cartoons?
Well, Mark.
Well, when you did a cartoon for Hanna-Barbera, they had a special procedure. You did a tape, an audition for them, and they had 3 mavens under contract. They were Lenny Weinrib, Dawes Butler, and Don Messick. And if none of them could do your voice, you got the job. And none of them could do my voice. That's how I got the job.
Alan Dinehart, Jr., actually, he directed a lot. He did some casting. He did a lot of directing on it. And he was a big fan of mine from my performance days. And years later, when they were putting Top Cat together, he said he'd like me to go down there and try to read for some of these characters. And one he had in mind specifically was the brain line, you know, that thing. Of course, I used to do bits of that. And I went out and did a couple of audition tapes, and that's how I got there. John Stevenson and myself, we were also what they would call utility infielders. In other words, the garbage man or the psychiatrist, and I was used sometimes as the enforcer. All right, DC, you better come around 4 o'clock or we're going to belt you, you know what I mean? You know, that kind of stuff. Like a punching fighter and things, the psychiatrist, etc. We just did other weird voices. And that's the way it happened.
This is a gang show. Like
McHale's Navy.
McHale's Navy, you know.
An ensemble group.
Absolutely. And they had to get voices that were very distinctive for the radio, for the audience, for the cartoon, and that would yet blend, you know. And they got actors who worked well together.
So did you record together?
Oh,
Yes. We all did at the beginning. It was like doing a stage play. we would do not only whole scenes, we'd do whole acts in one take. And,
Yeah,
then,
we
and
would-
if they didn't like it, they would give it, they say line so-and-so has to be done over.
Yeah.
And they would number each line, each, you know, and like they do
do
in a
pickup,
cartoon
yeah.
script. And you'd have pickups and so on, and you'd stay after school, this kind of thing. But I don't remember a session lasting over an hour and a half.
No, we did them fast. And you know, there was a certain amount of choreography involved. That's going to sound strange. But as there were certain scenes where we would all be going in and out, and they didn't want to just, okay, you record your thing, boop, you record your thing, boop. They didn't do it that way. They had like sometimes one, sometimes even two microphones. And we'd all line up knowing when our entrance was, and we'd go in there, and then this would do his line, and then he'd run off to the right, and this one would come shooting in and do his line. And you really had to know, what you were doing, and it was a lot of fun.
Maurice Gosfield. He was one of a kind. He was a marvelous human being. I loved Maurice. The worst driver I ever met in my whole life. He rented a car. Do you remember the car he rented? It was a Thunderbird. A white Thunderbird. Well, he had more dents on it, but he ended up owning it. But this is the problem with it. It had a wheel that his feet couldn't hit touch the gas pedal, so, and the wheel was too big in front of him, so it could move over to the side. So if you were in a passenger, you helped steer it with him. And then he'd call me every day, and he'd say, Marvin, and I knew from the tone of his voice. I said, another one? He said, and he said, I made a right turn. Well, I knew he made right turns from the center lane. So he said, a policeman followed me, and they pulled me over, and I backed into his motorcycle. And I said, Maurice, you shouldn't have done that. and then he said, but then he said something. He said, what I want to know, Marvin, is should I fight it? But we had the best. It was quality all the way. Radio actors were the best all-around group of people.
There were times when, seriously, we'd get in there and we'd be rolling, and then there'd be a little break, and we'd look at each other like, you mean we're getting paid for this too?
That's right. It was a party.
It was that much fun.
It was a party.
Can you tell me a little bit about working with Alan Jenkins?
Well, we were honored to be with Alan Jenkins because his background was incredible with all the Warner Brother great films. He was part of that whole gang, James Cagney, Pat O'Brien,
Frank McHugh.
Ed
Brophy.
Keep going. All of them. And he was such a pro, and you figure you couldn't imagine him in the world of animation, but I can't even dream of anyone else having done Officer Dibble because he was just fantastic. The voice, the understanding of the part. I like to sing, the whole thing. It was just marvelous.
Alan pretended to be grumpy. He wasn't grumpy at all. He was a marshmallow, and he loved cats. He had this cat who owned him, and he was a marvelous man. He was a legitimate actor, and he was marvelous. He was wonderful. Alan was perfect casting for that part because you needed an authority figure who wasn't obnoxious, and he was very kind and very gentle, and he was the nice cop, and yet we were all scared of him supposedly, and the gang had to be scared of somebody.
Well, how did you get into cartoons? Because you had been writing.
Well, because of Bilko.
Because of Bilko.
Yeah, because of Bilko. Because I knew Alan Dinehart, and he too tested me out on, I guess I did a Flintstones or a Jetsons, whatever.
Did you do Flintstones
Yeah,
first?
I did some Flintstones. And then later on came, I don't remember the order.
It was Flintstones, Top Cat, Jetsons.
Jetsons. So then the Jetsons must have come later, obviously. But yeah, I did. So I came in, and because I had done Bilko, they thought I would be able to get more of a feeling of the gang comedy. But then, because of Bilko, this is just an aside, I got typecast. I was doing from one service show to the other. McHale's Navy and Gomer Pyle. I couldn't get out of the service on it. And then came
Needed a
variety
discharge,
shows, and the same thing happens. You get typecast, you're glad to get the work, but then you become one of the boys on variety shows. It's a different feeling.
Barry, talk about the writing process a little bit on Top Cat.
Joe, I'd be mostly with Joe, and he'd sit with him, and he'd say, how about this, and why don't you do that? And then that's right. Then you'd send in an outline, do an outline, and that was part of your deal, you know, an outline. And I guess you could be cut off. Finally, I wasn't. So they were looking for writers, and this applies to the Flintstones and Jetsons and everything, that had done a lot of physical comedy in TV. Formerly, animation was very short. You know, they were short things, as you know, the background. So then when they started to go to the longer form and they wanted more story, that's when they brought in writers. Some writers didn't cut that. They were more into verbiage. And that's the other thing that writers learned, and not too much talk. You didn't want too much talk and too many, you know, exchanges. You wanted sight gags, and they were tough to do.
Marvin, let's talk a little bit about post Top Cat. Both you and Arnold were in It's a Mad, 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 Mad World together. So it's Choo Choo and Top Cat together. And
Right, and we did it with a man named Jonathan Winters.
Right.
Oh.
Great.
Was it a coincidence that you two were cast together? And
I got the part, and my agent sent me the script, and I called him up immediately, and I said, you know, I almost got killed reading the script. I mean, do you realize what I have to do in this picture? I have to throw stuff through windows. I have to be thrown through a window. And he said, Marvin, your deal is you can do all the stunts that your partner can do. And I said, who's my partner? They said, Arnold Stang. And I said, well, I knew Arnold was the biggest coward in the American theater. So I said, whatever Arnold consents us to do, I'll be glad to do.
I think a lot of people today probably know you best from the TV show Alice.
That's right. Yeah, I did that for 8 seasons.
Let's talk a little bit about character development. It sounded like from what you said before that Brain kind of was fully formed when you went in.
Well, it was a kind of a generic, you know, dopey guy. The thing that made Brain so appealing, from what I heard, I mean, on the animation itself, was it always had the half droopy eyes.
Right.
That worry. It was just so great. It was really great. So you just maintained that thing. Now Spook, on the other hand, was like in those days, the hipster. Hey, TC, baby, like, we're going to make the scene. You know what I mean? That kind of stuff.
And,
that was it.
Was it
Oh, yeah.
written that way?
Oh, yes. Yeah, Spook was written as the hippie, the hipster, you know. And I just gave it that kind of gravelly, swinging cadence.
So was that the first thing you did? Well, I mean, when you went into audition, was that the...
Yeah.
You
I
just
went
came up
right-
with that voice?
Well, the way the script was written, it just, you know, it just shoehorned me right into it. Is that a good word?
Yeah, that's a good
word,
That's a
yeah.
good word.
Shoehorned me in.
I like that.
And Marvin, what about Choo Choo?
Choo Choo was the cat that went to CCNY. He was the intellectual of the group. The way they dressed him with the turtleneck and all of that. And he loved Top Cat, you know, but he would never lock him on anything, but he didn't always think his ideas were that great. If he would intellectualize everything. He was the intellectual in the group. And it was a wonderful, they were also harmless. All these characters were so, just the opposite of what they would be today. They were very kind to each other and they liked each other and so on, yet certain faults they would point out to one another and so on. But I knew I wasn't the cop. I knew I wasn't the head guy. He was the assistant to the head guy, who was a very nice guy.
But you know, it seemed to me that TC generally trusted any messages that you had to deliver.
Because I was the smartest
Yeah.
one in the group.
He never questioned him too much. The other ones, you know,
Oh, come
forget
on.
about
you know,
it.
Yeah.
But Chooch was okay. He was all right. He trusted him.
Right.
In fact, I wonder, I don't know if you guys would even remember this, but later in the series, Top Cat starts calling Choo Choo Chooch.
Right.
And Top Cat's schemes always came out good at the. I mean, people would benefit. You'd have to stop wheeling and dealing, but something would be nice and there'd be a happy kind of an ending,
right,
right? You
right.
never,
It
yeah,
was
nothing.
very humanitarian.
Humanitarian is a good word. Yeah,
Philanthropic.
yeah,
He usually would do something for a philanthropic reason.
yeah.
And John Stevenson, I used to love the way he played the character. A little bit of Cary Grant.
Cary Grant, yeah.
Yeah, that little Cary Grant they had. That
And
was
they dressed
great.
us accordingly. He had the muffler or the
Yeah.
thing,
The
and
scarf
over
with
the
the-
thing.
So we'll start with Leo. When I say Bill Hanna, what comes to your mind?
I see a white-haired gentleman who has, he's such a contrast to Joe Barbera. You know, it's. I didn't have that much. I had much more contact with Joe Barbera than Bill Hanna. So all I can think of and comment on is what he looked like to me visually in the booth. You know.
Marvin?
He was a wonderful, kind, creative man, but he was a rather quiet man. And Joe takes stage, you know, and is very flamboyant and very on the ball. I mean, those aren't bad qualities, except it's the extrovert and the introvert.
Yeah.
He couldn't figure out what I did in the first place. And he said, I can't get your reading. Your readings are wonderful. Leave them alone, you know. So he never gave me too many notes. He's
Joe is an
amazing
interesting
man.
guy, wonderful guy to be with. He's very creative and bright and funny and made you feel good.
Very creative, very dynamic, very forceful in certain ways, but he sure gets things done and creates a great atmosphere for creativity and fun.
Marvin?
I agree. He's razzle-dazzle. Joe is magic. He's Mercury. He has his moods go from one to the other, and he's a magnificent human being, and he's a very kind human being, and he's a very doing human being, very active man.
He's worked his whole life.
Right.
Barry?
Well, I think of Joe as you said, dynamic, active, and Joe loved to travel. So he went to Rome and he saw the Pope and he did all these different. Yeah, he loved that.
And Joe was more political.
Joe was the salesman, too.
He
went
wa-
out and
oh,
sold
exactly.
the shows.
That's
yes,
right.
absolutely.
I remember when he'd go to New York to pitch, and he'd have these enormous, big leather cases and things.
the
and
briefcases,
Yeah,
you said.
yeah, and he'd go there and he'd be pitching these shows.
Tell me your maybe fondest memory or just what you think of when you see the shows today.
A couple of years ago, I had my granddaughters saw them for the first time, and they just got a kick out of all they would wait for is, oh, that's his voice. Oh, that's his voice.
That's nice. That's nice.
And it's so wonderful when you don't see it for a while, and then it gets fresh all over again. And it's amazing how many of, as I see it, I say, oh, I remember doing that. Or I remember the session, the recording session, just by hearing certain things, and the guests. But it's a great memory and one which is one of the highlights of my whole life, professionally speaking.
Marvin?
Excuse me. Marvin's laugh is another highlight.
To you, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, onward.
Dickens said it was the best of times. This was the best of times. It was wonderful. Very happy experiences. Animation and cartoons were at a very high level. They were at a high intellectual level. There was some content to them. And the people were kind and generous and warm and philanthropic and humanistic. And we were living in a very different kind of society. And it was a wonderful, wonderful time, and I was very glad to be part of it. And the people, those wonderful people, the ones who are still here and the ones who have gone, they were remarkable in terms of their talent. I can only think of one word in terms of the show itself: quality, very high quality, in the writing, in the concept, and in the performances. Beautiful.
And we were all team players.
Right.
That was a great connection and a great bonding with that enthusiasm.
but yet each individual stood out, which is very rare in a
Yeah.
team. There was no friction. I don't remember
No.
any kind of competition
No.
or backbiting or anything like that. I really don't.
Barry, your
Well, I
memories?
just had sort of personal experience. I had an office in West LA for years, and I recently, for various reasons, moved back into my home. And in the process of leaving the office, where I was at almost 15 years, I had a lot of scripts, and I had a lot of scripts of all the Flintstones and Top Cat, and I was looking at some of the scripts, and it got to me. I remembered all that with a lot of sentimentality. So I'm going to miss that. I really am. But here's my number in case.
And your card.
My God. Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for taking this time with us. This has just been a real treat. And thank you for the laughter and fun. And it's just been really great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us
caring
here on this
enough
day.
about this.
I have some final words to those that are purchasing this. No refunds. Okay?
You got it, you bought it, forget it.
Forget it.
Right, right.
Yeah.